Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Unity Spiritual Center of Pflugerville. We're talking this morning. I was looking for a subject to work with this week, and I've kind of wanted to do some of the metaphors and metaphysical stories that are in the Bible. And I looked at the daily word for today, and it popped out. It went, bing, this is what we need to talk about. And basically what it said today was centered in truth, centered in God, centered in all that is. And that chant, by the way, was kind of interesting. It really was. My spiritual potential is unlimited. Now, I looked up the word potential. The Daily Word has a definition, but I kind of like the definition that I found in the dictionary. And that definition was basically having or showing the capacity to become or develop into something. So we all have the capacity to become spiritually complete. Okay? And what's fascinating about that, it's within every one of us because we are part of divinity. And we are divinity, actually, if I can use that terminology. And what's interesting about it, though, the word potential implies we're not there unless we make the step to be there. So the potential conversation is very, very important, and especially important when we're dealing with a spiritual path. We are all there. We are all children of God. Each one is imbued innately with spirit of the universe and is actually part or is God. So the truth is, though, we have to step into it and accept it and say, I'm there. Very interesting conversation. And that is a path. We'll call that a spiritual path. And that's what's so wonderful about this community, this church, is folks are on a spiritual path. Really, really serious about becoming integrated with all that is. Okay, one of the things Course of Love talks about that we just mentioned was that everything is love. When we learn to operate from the heart rather than the mind, life starts working. In the Course of Love, it's called wholeheartedness, which means my whole body, my whole self is integrated with spiritual awareness. And that is a step into divinity, and it's part of, let's call it the secret code that Jesus was using in the Bible. Now, the Bible is full of metaphors. A lot of people don't quite understand that. And we go back, and the big argument is it metaphor? Is it history? What is it? And it really doesn't matter if you take a look at it and try to understand what it is through it. But the stories in the Old Testament and some of the parables that Jesus used are all part of a metaphor explaining what we are up to. And the metaphor that came to me this week is David and Goliath. Big story, everybody's familiar with it. If you did any Sunday school at all, you went through David and Goliath. And it's really a fascinating story. And the story itself is a metaphor or a metaphysical interpretation for us to act, something to act out. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's in Samuel chapter 17. But the whole idea here is that David was a young boy. Now, we don't know how young. I'm going to guess 15 or 16. And the Philistines were the arch enemies of the Israelites. And they were in a valley, and both sides had stepped up. They were in battle formation. Everybody there? So they're in the middle of this valley, and the Philistines were at one end, and the Israelites were at the other end. They were camped out, ready to go to war. Now, war back then was shields and armor and big swords and spears, okay? And there was a giant within the Philistines called Goliath. Big guy. And it talks in here that he was a master warrior. He was huge. They call him a giant in here, but we don't really know how big he was. But let's just pretend he was 8 foot tall. Okay? Now, can you imagine an 8 foot tall or even a 7 foot tall warrior all decked out in armor with a huge shield, a spear, and a sword? Anybody agree you wouldn't want to tackle that? Okay. So it is a metaphor for the ultimate fear that we could ever experience. And Goliath, in a metaphysical interpretation, if you look it up in the metaphysical dictionary, is the material self. the power that's out in our subconscious mind running us. Okay? And guess what David is? Metaphysically, David is the internal mental self, the spiritual self, if you want to go there, but it's more the heart and the being of that's within us. And what happened was Jesse, who was David's father, sent David to the front with a meal. It's called a meal with water and something to eat. His brothers were in the army, and they were camped at the other end of the valley getting ready to go to war. And Jesse, the father, said, David, take this stuff to your brothers. Everybody there? Okay, now, David got there, and he heard that evidently at the time Goliath had given a challenge and said, listen, rather than go to war, somebody come out and fight me, and if I win, your subjects or Israel will bow down to us. And if you win, we will bow down to you. Everybody there? So what he was doing was saying, I'm the biggest, I'm the strongest, I'm going to get whoever you send against me. And here he was, all decked out, okay? And he came out and made this challenge. David happened to be delivering the biscuits and whatever to his brothers and heard it. And he went to Saul, the king at the time, and said, I'll handle it. Now, understand, a 15, 16-year-old kid, probably in a loincloth or whatever, and shepherd, he was a shepherd, and can you imagine yourself, somebody coming to you and say, I'll go take care of him, okay? And David goes on and says, and Saul says, who are you? What are you going to do? How can you do to this guy? And David said, well, I killed a mountain lion, and I killed a bear, and God is always with me. Let me go and slay Goliath. Hello? So here's this unbelievable battle being brought up, and it looks completely lopsided. Okay? And David says, and Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a boy. And he has been a man of war from his youth. He's a trained warrior. And anybody's been through any kind of training, when you go through basic training, they get you to think like a warrior. Okay? Then he goes down, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me out of the hands of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you, I hope. Now, I hope is my edit. Because think about this battle that is being put together. Now, we know, and it goes on, he says that he took a staff in his hand and chose 5. So Saul took his armor and put it on David, because he figured he would fight him in normal ways. So Saul took his armor and put it on David. Can you imagine a 15 or 16-year-old kid weighed down with armor, with a shield he's never been with, and a sword he has no understanding how to use? Okay, so he had it on, and he started rumbling out, and what he did was he said, nope, this isn't going to work, and he got rid of it. And all he did, it says in here, he stopped and he took a staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones out of the gravel and put them into his shepherd's bag. Okay? Even into his wallet, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So here's this young kid, 15, 16, 14, whatever you want to make up, walking to battle with this huge giant full of armor and a big shield and a huge sword and a spear. How would you feel? And you see the tension and the ability. In other words, he looks like he's getting ready to be killed and fed to the ravens or whatever. Okay, and that's a metaphor for how strong God can be working through anybody to overcome the evilest thing they can think of. Anybody familiar with meeting your Waterloo? Anybody familiar with meeting your Goliath? Because we all have issues that come up in life that appear so big that they scare the heck out of us. And I use the word heck on purpose, okay? Because I like to use another word. But the whole idea behind it is to show us how bad that stuff looks out there and how much power we have to overcome Goliath. Then it goes on and talks about, and when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth. Okay, so those perils out there, all that stuff that looks nasty, is kind of laughing at us and saying, come on, give me a chance. I'll get you. Okay? And then it says, but a youth and ruddy and fair of countenance. In other words, he didn't even look rough. He just looked like a kid, probably unshaven in today's world. Okay? And the Philistine said to David, come, and I will give your flesh to the fowl of the air. And David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Okay, now see, I want you to get the picture. This is why the Bible in itself has so much to share with us, not from a historical point, but from a metaphor of how to live life. And that's what this whole thing is a metaphor on how to live life. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will slay you and take you. And then it goes on and says, with a single stone and his sling, he hit Goliath right here on the forehead, and Goliath went down. So there's the story. Isn't that an amazing story? And the key to it is we've heard it over, at least I have, over and over and over again. But if you take it as a metaphor and understand how powerful we are, because intentionally we are David. And when these big issues come up, we want to run for the hills. My God, I'm not going to go against that jerk. Okay? Have you been there? We all have. And we all have issues. And we all have issues that we're going to want to run from. But it's like, the phrase that came to me this morning was, stand in place and stare it down. And that's not easy. It really isn't. It's a process of life, learning to trust and have faith that God is with me. And if what had happened if David had lost his courage at the last minute? Okay? So can you imagine how much confidence it took for him to take a sling? Now, here's a key. Goliath was used to working with swords and spears and shields and armor. And he felt completely safe in his environment and his hugeness and his size. And here's a little shepherd boy with a sling, which is a totally new way of attack. So we are bringing the way of attack against the physical problems we experience with a new type of weapon, which is called spirit, if that makes any sense. So the metaphor is clearly for us, in my opinion. Now, we're going to keep working on metaphor after metaphor after metaphor, but it's everywhere present. And the question becomes, what are we afraid of? What are we looking at all the time? Course in Miracles, Madeline happened to pick out a part in the Course in Miracles this Saturday. It was kind of interesting to me. The world you see is what you gave it. It is nothing more than that. So if we look out there and see Goliath and run, would you agree we have made the decision that that thing is unsurmountable? Then it goes on and says, but it's true no more than that, it is not less. Therefore to you it is important if you make it important. If you make Goliath unsurmountable and run, guess what? He'll chase you. I've experienced that. Then it goes on and says, therefore seek not to change the world and the people in it, but choose to change your mind about the world you see. Hello. Is that the key to trust and faith? And it's knowing within me is the power of the universe to overcome anything that challenges me. Okay? Because as a man thinketh, so does he perceive. Therefore, seek not to change the world, but choose to change your mind. Okay? We don't. The world you see but shows you how much joy you have allowed yourself to see in you. So, we talk about a positive attitude, which is joyful, happy. So when I'm happy and joyful, I'm looking at Goliath and saying, you don't affect me at all. Very, very interesting metaphor. I understand you guys in practical metaphysics have finished the book. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, congratulations. How many weeks did it take? Do you have any idea? Okay, I just wondered.
Each week was a blessing.
Well, I had to pull something out of it because this is, the need is not to change people, it's not to change things, not to set them right or to straighten them out. Anybody agree? We want to straighten everybody doesn't think the way we do. I'm talking politics, I'm talking the next door neighbors, I'm talking some family members, okay? We always want to change things out there. This says, I'll say it again, the need is not to change people or events, not to set them right or straighten them out, but to see them rightly and straighten out our own projected consciousness. Because see, when we think and when we create a consciousness, the world we see is what we're creating as we walk into it. Then it goes on and says, the only wrong involved as far as I'm concerned is that I'm seeing out of negative consciousness. I have to straighten that out, and that's all I can ever do. When I straighten out my own thoughts and get myself centered in the consciousness of love, the heart, not a love that is human, but a love that is of spirit. So the whole idea is when I look out, do I see a Goliath or do I see a David? And am I really a David ready to take on those issues that show up for him? Interesting conversation. And it requires us to have a base. In other words, we need to have a base of centering prayer, if I can use that terminology, silence, meditation. It also takes a certain amount of time to establish the faith and trust that we really are David expressing itself. We really are Christ expressing itself. We really do have the power to overcome things and know that it's not real. It's part of the illusion we have created. And it's part of the spiritual path. So anyway, anytime I've seen a lot of I've seen a lot of Goliaths in my life. Sometimes he's won. I'm willing to admit that. I'm learning, okay? Because we are all on that path of overcoming and knowing that we really are David and we can overcome what we see around us and we can establish a life full of joy and happiness in the way we approach our lives in a spiritual way. So anyway, having said that, thank you for being part of this journey, because we're on a journey. And we're on a journey that's returning back to the Father, if I call it the prodigal son. We're the prodigal children. And we are going back to where we really are meant to be, which is one in the Spirit. So thank you. I've said enough. I know I want to talk because I got 3 or 4 other points, but I made my point. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's kind of like, shut up.